10 months ago, someone killed the father of my children. First we got divorced, and then he got murdered.
Oh my God! What happened?
I'm not sure there's a better known law professor. Dan Markel was known by everybody.
I mean, there wasn't a thing that the couple didn't fight about. Thinking about divorce, he told her that, if she ever did that, she'd never see her kids again.
111 seizure, severe emergency.
The driver's side window is all bashed in, and he's got blood all over his head.
My ex-husband caused me a lot of grief. I would never do something like this.
I have something I want to tell you, but I want it off the I want to concern about my safety. The family. Like, their hobby is hating Danny.
But who in the Adelson family would actually be able to orchestrate a hit on Dan Markel?
My brother, Charlie, makes the joke. He said I looked at hiring a hitman and it was cheaper to get you this TV.
Dr. Adelson?
What I love about what I do is being able to restore people's smiles.
I don't have evidence to charge the Adelsons. I can't go on TV and accuse them of murder.
This woman's put on trial for murder, but did someone put her up to it? And does anything connect her to the Adelsons?
If this was the Coen Brothers movie, that would be an unbelievable plot.
This isn't a story about the happy ever afters, the lucky ones, the couples who grow more inseparable with age. Not even close. It's a story about the opposite. A bad marriage, a worse breakup, a brutal divorce.
I'm Matthew Scher, and I'm a journalist. I've been a writer for the past about 11 years. I'd never done a podcast before.
She said, but it had something to do with the amount of money it would cost to have someone killed.
Oh, are you saying that you think maybe one of your friends would have done something like this?
We had well over 10 million downloads, so it had well surpassed anything we thought could happen in terms of popularity.
This is a case about how our highest dreams, our highest moments in our lives, like a marriage and children, can very quickly become tragic.
The fact that this is a murder done in broad daylight and by people who didn't seem to care if they were seen. There was just a very bold homicide.
The mysterious killing of a prominent law professor at Florida State University. Police are convinced it's a murder case, but so far there are no good leads. ABC's Matt Gutman has the story.
He's found dead in his garage, and this quickly becomes one of the most sensational crimes news, and they assigned me to do it. This morning, police are scrambling to unravel the riddle who killed Professor Dan Markel.
Dan Markel had grown up in a relatively affluent part of Toronto.
Dan was the epitome of Dennis the Menace. So he was blonde, he was cute, and he was rambunctious and wild.
He had a very serious commitment to his Jewish heritage.
Danny was very involved in the rituals of Judaism. He also liked the intellectual parts of it, Torah or Talmud. He liked the argumentative side of it.
He was extremely smart.
His goal was to go to Harvard. Harvard was the only school in his mind that he was going to go to. There's a word in Yiddish called mensch. He would be a mensch, great character and great personality. He was my best friend.
He ended up with a degree from law school.
After graduating from law school, he was working for a boutique law firm in Washington, D.C., and he was on the short for partnership.
While Dan is still in D.C., he meets a woman named Wendy Adelson. He meets her on J-Date.
Sweetie, have you met any nice boys in your building yet?
Are they Jewish?
I have no idea. All we're asking for is grandchildren.
Wendy is just, fun and full of joy. She's a lovely person who has just kind of, boundless enthusiasm and energy and sense of humor.
That she was extremely charismatic, extremely outgoing, goofy to a certain extent. She'd been on The Weakest Link, the game show.
Wendy, have you always wanted to work in a think tank? Is that what you want to do with your life?
No, it definitely isn't.
What have you always wanted to do?
When I was little, I wanted to be a giraffe.
Wendy Adelson had grown up in the Miami area. Her dad, Harvey, was a dentist, and her mom, Donna, had worked as a teacher initially and then came to the dental practice. She had two older brothers, Rob and Charlie. And Charlie would eventually become a dentist. Rob would become a doctor.
I think things happened fairly quickly for them. They were long distance. He was in DC at that time and she was in Florida, so there were some great weekend trips. There was a really strong connection and she, was really drawn to him.
He decided to go to teach, and me, like most fathers would say, why don't you practice law for 10 years, put a chunk in the bank, and then go teach? But he wouldn't hear from that.
Eventually, he gets an offer from Tallahassee, from Florida State University, to come be a law professor. He says yes. And the law school had offered Wendy a teaching position too, on a contract basis. He and Wendy then get engaged.
To me, it seemed like a fairly conventional Jewish wedding. Lots of rabbis came, and there was dancing and smiling. She was a happy bride.
Although the Markells and the Adelsons were both paying for the wedding, sure.
But when he showed up to his own wedding, he learned that actually the wedding was not going to be kosher, and I think that was a very devastating moment for him.
And it would set the table for things that developed later on. In fact, played a part in that divide between the in-laws and Daniel Markel.
After the wedding, Dan and Wendy returned to Tallahassee.
The identity of Tallahassee is completely tied to FSU.
3 national championships. It's a very big deal.
Whether it's football or it's the education system, the two are one.
It wasn't Miami. It wasn't where Wendy had come from.
It has sort of a sleepy southern sensibility to it. It's more feeling of, South Georgia or Alabama than it does Miami Beach for sure.
They have 2 boys. The boys are separated by less than 2 years.
He loved the boys. They were his world. And everything revolved around them.
He was obsessed with his kids.
Our second speaker is Dan Markel.
Greetings, everybody. Let me just sort of give you a few of the bullet points of the argument, and then...
I'm not sure there's a better-known law professor. Dan Markel was known by everybody. At some basic level, he liked to argue, and he liked to make sure people understood his arguments.
So, the paper is about the tissue connecting democratic citizenship with retributive justice, and the argument is that contrary to some of the leading criminal law theorists, like Michael Moore or...
He could needle people, right? He could poke and prod, and he enjoyed it, but were there people who didn't like it? Of course. Wendy, meanwhile, was moving in a very different direction. She'd had enough of living in a city she hated. Tallahassee's a long way from Miami. That's where she'd grown up. That's where she wanted to be.
Wendy also had aspirations of being a great lawyer, but living with Dan, she felt like she wasn't treated as his equal. Some of the people who were close to her say that Dan's hectic work schedule and his frenetic lifestyle really put her career in the back seat.
I thought I could cheat the system and marry a man I lacked passionate love for because, hey, didn't that die anyway during marriage?
Now, the only time you're able to hear Wendy actually articulate how she felt about the marriage is in a podcast she would later put together in a writing class. And when you listen to it, it sounds almost as if she's in a therapy session.
Our marriage dissolved after the children arrived, as the loneliness of being married to someone that didn't view me as an equal crept in.
Wendy also started to work on a novel. It was called This Is Our Story. Major parts of the novel appeared to be pretty nakedly autobiographical.
One of her characters was a journey.
We built love like a house of cards. No support, pulled away from our support systems. We just couldn't make it work for each other.
Wendy spends months working on this book, and Dan doesn't read it. Not a word. That is obviously and understandably hurtful to Wendy.
I see Dan in New York, and he's telling me that he thinks his marriage is unwinding. She seems disengaged, fairly depressed.
She had a plan. She was going to book moving trucks, fill out divorce papers, and then she was going to take her 2 boys and get the hell out of Tallahassee.
He came home to an empty house. There was basically nothing there but his marital bed with divorce papers on it. Everything else had been removed, including his children. So this was quite stunning and was a pretty bad sign of things to come.
Imagine that you're Dan Markel. You're on a short business
to New York. You get a call from your wife. She tells you she's leaving you. You cut your trip short. You get the first flight home. But as you open the door, you notice the house is weirdly quiet.
In September 2012, Dan Markel returned from a business trip to his home in Tallahassee.
He came home to an empty house. I mean, effectively a house that had been stripped of its belongings.
She took half the chairs and half the furniture.
You walk into your bedroom. The bed is still there. And on it, you see a stack of divorce papers.
She had moved money from savings accounts. She had taken his uncle's diamond engagement ring, and that was a big deal for him.
It was a unique way of being served.
They seemed like the perfect couple. Wendy was happy and smiling. They had beautiful children.
I am pretty good at detecting these things, more than most people. So I was shocked.
But in that podcast she recorded, Wendy made it clear the marriage just wasn't working.
I do believe he loved me the best way he knew how. I mean, he didn't like fiction, so why read my novel?
In the marriage, there seemed to be a competitive element. Dan Markel was a tenured professor. Wendy was not a tenured professor.
You know, things that maybe at first she thought she could live with, it kind of became clear how unhappy it was making her.
She felt that she was being asked to keep the home, and while he engaged in his professional pursuits.
And such a good person. But he was the only one that knew the truth about what a bad person I was. He was convinced I had deluded everyone but him.
I was worried that he was being emotionally abusive towards her, belittling her in a way and making her question herself in a way that I thought was really unkind, and that extended over a long period.
For probably a year after it happened, he was focused on just trying to win her back in some way.
He found Wendy and bought flowers and kneeled before her, asking her to take him back. And she said no.
He did everything he could until she said, absolutely no chance I'm ever coming back.
She had been talking to him for a long time about her unhappiness, thinking about divorce. He told her that, you know, if she ever did that, you know, she'd never see her kids again. She'd be penniless. She left in the way that the lawyer judged safest for her and the kids.
Things turned sour quickly. They were fighting over custody of their kids.
Wendy was desperate to get the children out of here. She did not want to live here, like to move to South Florida to be closer to her family. She filed a motion to relocate the children.
The acrimony and the fighting over the two boys was extreme. It could not have been more personal, more nasty.
Dan was almost panic-stricken about not being a father to his children. He would give up almost anything if he could just get an agreement where he could go hug his children and kiss them goodnight every night. And she basically played every card she could. She made every argument she could, and then the court rejected it.
The way that the marriage settlement had been arranged was they split custody.
So the children were going to stay in Tallahassee.
And there was a sense that Wendy was really stuck.
It was all like adversarial from that point.
Donna, Wendy's mother, grows incensed when she learns that Wendy and her boys won't be able to move closer to her in South Florida.
Danny made it clear to me that Donna did not like him. He would do a lot of Skype with the children. And one time, one of the sons said, "Grandma called you stupid."
According to emails between Wendy and Donna, really became unhinged. Donna writing these really long, 8,000, 10,000 word emails about how to circumvent this judge's ruling. This is one of the emails from not long after the judge ruled. Donna refers to Dan Markel as gibbers, which is clearly a derogatory term, and I'm not quite sure of its origin. It says, it's time to take control of your life and not let gibbers think he just won anything by having you remain in Tallahassee.
Let's show this what will make him absolutely miserable. You know his weak points. Money, religion, control.
If you can see a woman who's really staying up too late thinking...
No, your children will be baptized in the Catholic Church. Take control from him. He's going to want you to stop this.
Donna actually suggests to Wendy that they convert the grandkids to Christianity because she thinks, well, Dan is such a devout Jew that he would prefer seeing his kids be moved away from him to Miami than keep them in Tallahassee as Christians. That gives you a sense
how desperate Donna seemed to be.
Dan was pushing for only supervised visitation with the grandmother.
It was bitter. They argued over seeing the kids, when they would see the kids.
At some point, it starts to taper off a little bit, at least stabilize, to the point where Dan and Wendy can both get on with their lives. And for both of them, that did mean dating. So Wendy was introduced to a social work professor at FSU, Jeff Lacasse. This is one of the first things that people point out about Jeff is that he looked a little like Dan, strangely. Dan is dating as well.
He found a new girlfriend that he really, really liked, and that relationship had kind of taken off.
I said, you're having fun in life again, you're smiling a lot. The divorce no longer defines you. You have to start celebrating those things and walk away from this negativity. And he walked away from that conversation saying, you're right, and I really need to do that.
July 18th, 2014.
It's a little after 11 o'clock in the morning.
The neighbor heard a loud pop at Dan Markel's house.
He was parked in his black Honda in the garage. He happened to have been on the phone with a friend of his. So his friend was hearing muffled, he heard some muffled, he heard a voice, and then he heard the shot.
The neighbor saw a car pulling out of the driveway and speeding off down the road.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
We heard a loud bang and a car pulled away from next door. Driver's side window is all bashed in, and he's got blood all over his head.
He had been shot at close range. His face was completely obliterated.
A dreaded phone call came in, and they tell me some cockamamie story that his son's been shot.
Like, this was like way beyond my dreams even.
There was a lot of speculation about who could have been involved.
I don't know. That's why you're here. That's why we're talking.
Friday, July 18th.
His driver's side window is shattered. He's battered and can't answer. He's inside. The car is running, and he's got blood all over his head. He's not responding to me.
The ambulance does eventually get there, and the EMTs see that Dan's been shot in pretty close range, and it's a mess. There's glass shattered all over the place. Dan's glasses are broken. The door of the car is still open, and Dan is, at that point, still alive. He's not, I don't think he was responsive in any way. He'd been shot at close range in the head. He's taken to a hospital, and obviously the first person that they're going to notify is, they try to get to the parents, but then they try to get to Dan's ex, Wendy, the mother of his children.
At the time, she's having lunch with a friend. Police managed to get her, and they said, you need to come to the police department.
There was a shooting at your ex-husband's home. Daniel, has been taken to the hospital. He's not going to survive.
Oh my God.
Okay?
What happened?
Well, before we get into everything, I have to establish where you were and who you were with and so forth. Okay? And then when we've established all that, I can give you more details. Do you understand why I wanted you to come here before I discuss this?
Oh my God. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I mean, you have nothing to be sorry about.
I don't understand. How did this happen?
At the time, she is pretty open. She sits down for hours, and during that time, the police look at her phone. They look at her ID. They swab her for fingerprints. Everything that you would do with a potential suspect. They never call her a suspect, and it's an interview, not an interrogation, but she does provide all of this willingly.
You're not under arrest or anything like that.
I understand why you think I'm the primary suspect.
No, you're not the primary suspect. I have to work just as hard whether you were or you're not.
My ex-husband caused me a lot of grief. I would never do something like that.
And
understand why I would be the person you would think would do something, but
Well, we have to work just as hard to eliminate
it's
people.
fine. I want to figure out who this is.
It's natural for the spouse to be questioned extensively in the first hours of someone being murdered.
Not long after dawn, less than 24 hours after he'd been shot, Dan Markel died in the hospital.
I don't wish this on anybody. I would have liked to be there when he died, hold his hand or something, and I couldn't. I mean, it was very hard. It was just literally out of this world.
Markel's death reverberates not just in Tallahassee, but across Florida. Local news is there to cover his memorial, and there are colleagues, friends, family, people from all over the country.
He's going to be greatly missed. You know, he left an indelible mark, and it's good to see how vast it extends.
We knew he had lots of friends, but what we learned is how intense these friendships were with such a huge and wide variety of people from all walks of life.
Good evening. Florida State University law professor's murder.
FSU professor shot and killed inside his home.
Tallahassee police now scrambling to unravel the riddle of who killed
Police
Florida
are
State
asking
University.
for any information you're urged.
The reaction to Dan's death was enormous. I mean, earth-shattering for Tallahassee. A law professor who gets shot in his driveway and we don't know why.
And one of the things that so stood out was this cloud of fear and anxiety hanging over Tallahassee. People didn't know if this was just a random shooting or a serial killer on the loose.
No suspects have been identified at this time.
Right after the shooting, police didn't have much to go on, but they did get one lead. The neighbor who called 911 from that house told them that he saw a light-colored car that looked like a Prius back out of the driveway and head down the road.
You said there was another vehicle that you saw driving away?
Yes, and it left the scene rapidly. It looked sort of like a Prius.
Once the police let it be known that the car that they were looking at was a Prius, it was one of the strange elements of this story as we were trying to piece together who on earth would do this to this man.
So in the immediate aftermath of this shooting, it's pretty wide open. Police were willing to entertain just about everything. Police were looking into road rage. That was a possibility. Someone had seen someone driving aggressively down the street around the time of Dan's murder.
With him being so prominent in the legal world, there was a lot for investigators to chew on.
They also looked, of course, in a college town, you're going to say, was an unhappy student. Did you get a student get a bad grade of some sort or have a run-in with him?
They just thought, my God, this happened to one of us, and another one of us might be next. Pretty scary. I walked out of my office late one Sunday afternoon to a metallic green Toyota Prius, and I confess that sent a shiver up my spine.
While all of these theories of who murdered Dan Markel were circulating, police started to think this was someone who loved her.
He didn't like Danny because Danny hurt me. I see why he's a good suspect. Like, what if it's Jeff? Like, when I did this by asking for some time away from him, I made him crazy.
Your name did come up, of course.
I was in love with this girl, man, so it's hard. I mean, she really has this charisma, this sexuality, and so, you throw yourself around a bus for this girl.
The police continue to walk through all the possibilities with Wendy. For 8 hours, they talk about all the people who might have something against Dan Markel.
Wendy does not hold back in this interview. She talks about how bad the divorce was. She talks about how Dan was emotionally abusive to her. She talks about how she wants to get down to Miami. She doesn't pull any punches. It's all out there.
He never hurt me physically, but he was emotionally abusive.
Okay.
And I didn't tell most people that, so all most people know is it just didn't work out. So other than my family, who saw the way he treated me, he told everyone around the community that I was mentally ill, because only a crazy person would leave him.
Do you know anybody that would have a beef against your ex-husband?
She talked about a guy she knew she was dating, Jeffrey Lacasse.
He didn't like Danny because Danny hurt me. I see why he's a good suspect. Like, what if it's Jeff? Like, when I did this by asking for some time away from him, I made him crazy.
Lacasse himself comes into the police station to give his own interview.
Your name did come up, because you were associated at some point with Wendy.
Of course. Which has spent a lot of time with Wendy. I don't think anybody's been with Wendy more than me in the last 6 months. I don't know if you met Wendy.
Not personally.
Oh, she's very charismatic. I'm not the only man who's been under her thumb in that way. I mean, she really has this charisma, this sexuality, and so, you throw yourself in front of a bus for this girl. It's just a new kind of thing for me. But I was in love with this girl, man, so it was hard.
Jeff's interview, maybe more so than Wendy's, is extraordinary because he's a boyfriend who is in the process of breaking up with Wendy, and it's a contentious breakup by both of their admissions.
You've never had any kind of physical contact with Danny?
No. I'm surprised you guys didn't call me earlier, though, because I probably said 100 times in public that I like to kick his ass, because he kept really making me suffer and things like that.
Right.
But no, I would never. I'm a professor. I'm not going to do anything like that. No.
He's right up front about saying that he didn't like this guy. He also has an ironclad alibi. He was out of town.
I stayed at a really crappy Days Inn, maybe 20 miles south of Atlanta.
He's got the receipts. He was not here, so that immediately puts him in the clear.
But right away something clicks in his head, and he seems to say, I think I know he's not going to do it unless there's some sort of guarantee in place.
I have something I want to tell you, but I want it off there. I'm more concerned about my safety with what I'm going to tell you, to be honest. So Danny Markel just got killed, and I don't want to be next. I'm sorry if that sounds paranoid, but I do have some ideas.
And Lacasse points to none other than Wendy's family, her parents and brother who run that very successful South Florida dental clinic.
The family desperately wants her back in South Florida. They hate Danny in a way I've never seen this kind of obsession. Like, their hobby is hating Danny.
And family friends like the Greenbergs also tell police about the toxic family dynamics between Dan and the Adelsons.
I think they're mean. I think to do some of the stuff that they did during this divorce with Danny is just not reasonable.
Hi, Mom. How's it going? I need you to sit down.
Then there's another point in the interview where she has to tell her mother that her ex was murdered, and she calls her mom and tells her
Danny has been shot.
There was a point where she was just kind of saying she was relieved to find that her mom was surprised at the news.
Well, my parents sounded really surprised, so it's at least a relief. I was trying to think of who would be angry enough to do something to him. My parents would be angry, but they're not capable of this. Thank God. I really couldn't handle that right now.
I think everything was going through her head at that time. She had to be wondering, my God, would she be so crazy to come up here and do something?
My parents have more reason to dislike Danny than almost anyone else. He hurt their daughter. But even my family, who felt like I had been mistreated, would never do something like this. Never.
So Wendy leaves the police station, and later, through her attorney, she says, my family had nothing to do with this.
And as the Tallahassee police are talking to eyewitnesses, persons of interest, fielding tips from the hotline, they're also pulling videos from the closed-circuit cameras that caught Dan's movements that day. And it's here that they get their first big lead. When they look at the footage from the cameras outside Dan's gym, they see that when Dan's Accord left the lot that morning, another car was following him.
They were able to figure out that the Prius was at Premier Fitness, where Dan was. They were able to drill down on this Prius, tracking down this one car out of millions.
It was a break, the first big break.
After leaving Tallahassee, Wendy stays with her parents for about a year, then moves into a 2-bedroom apartment in Miami Beach with her 2 boys. She seems to her neighbors like a woman who's got it all. 2 cute kids, plus a prestigious job clerking for a federal judge.
And in addition to that work, Wendy also took a creative writing class. And it was during that class that she produced this podcast that laid bare all of her feelings about Dan Markel.
10 months ago, someone killed the father of my children. First we got divorced, then he got murdered.
She makes this joke in the podcast that she doesn't know how to refer to Dan.
I don't know whether to call him my ex-late spouse or my late ex-spouse. Except that late ex-spouse sounds like late ex-spouse.
For Dan Markel's survivor, course, it didn't play well.
I think she was honest in the same way that, we often are, the way I would be if I was doing a writing exercise. It feels sacrilegious these days, even to suggest something less than heroic about my late ex-husband, because he was murdered.
It's obviously not a joking matter. You don't want to be lighthearted about any of that.
I don't think she set out to disparage Danny so much as she, was reflecting honestly on what the experience was like for her.
The first 2 years, there was no breakthrough. And needless to say, we're very anxious to get some news.
While most people thought that the trail had gone cold, the Tallahassee police had been busily putting together who was inside that silver Prius.
People in the neighborhood, in Dan's neighborhood, had reported seeing a silver Prius the day before, kind of driving around. So they put out a statement saying, if anyone has information about this car, can you come forward?
Investigators are asking anyone with information about this vehicle or similar vehicles to please call the tip line.
The Prius was really the thing that they focused on initially. They had surveillance video of it from city buses that it had driven by. Intersection cameras were able to capture it.
This is a picture of the actual suspect vehicle. There are 4 things about this car that we're asking our viewers to look at. The first thing is going to be the color.
Silver pine mica.
Silver pine mica. It means it's going to be sometimes silver, sometimes green, depending on the light.
How many silver pine mica Priuses are there around Tallahassee?
I guess there's probably a lot everywhere, but this one was pretty unique because it had a black passenger side mirror.
On the driver's side, it's the same color as the car. On this side, it's black. They're supposed to be the same color as the vehicle.
It was missing a tow cap.
If you look down here in the corner, there is a hole where you would put a tow vehicle into it.
And they notice there's a sun pass. It's the toll road pass.
There's a toll card reader, it appears, in the front windshield.
Now, in Tallahassee at the time, we don't have any toll roads, so people don't go around with SunPass screeners, or Central Florida. They then began this absolutely extensive search all over the state for this type of color, this type of Prius with this SunPass on it.
The Tallahassee Police Department did an amazing job combing through all of those pieces of hay in the haystack and found a needle.
They were able to track it all the way down to Miami to a corner car rental place.
When police pulled those toll records, it led them here to this hole-in-the-wall rental agency here in Miami that rents mostly hybrids. Now, inside, a contract was signed leading police to the men who rented that green Prius.
And when they went and looked at who signed for the car to be rented, their names were right there. Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia. They signed their actual names on the rental agreements. I think Sigfredo signed it that he was the brother of Luis Rivera.
It's hard to overstate how important this is because for the first time, they've got a lead on a person who was driving the car that was seen in the area.
And when investigators begin to look into Luis Rivera's background, they're baffled. It seems to be this huge mystery. There doesn't seem to be anything that links him to this respected law professor.
This is a very tough neighborhood. As you can see, it's one way in, one way out.
According to this undercover detective we interviewed, Luis Rivera was already well known to Miami police. He was a member of the notorious Latin Kings gang and even went by the moniker of King Tato.
He was the first crown, which is the leader for the North Miami Beach chapter of the Latin Kings. Of course, he'd be the main one giving the orders out, knowing everything exactly that's going on.
And then there was Sigfredo, who wasn't necessarily a gang affiliate. He had a long list of priors as well. He was just known as Tudo. Both of these guys had just living on the margins.
A lot of it related to drugs. They'd known each other a really long time. They'd been friends since they were teenagers.
Police must have really lit up when they found rental agreement. Now you can get their phone records.
It got down to the point where they could hour by hour tell you where that car was.
On Wednesday, July 16, 2014, cell phone records showed the two men heading up north on I-75 on that 7-hour trip to Tallahassee. On Friday morning, July 18th, cell phone towers placed the two of them right outside Dan Markel's fitness center. Now, Markel is shot at 11 a.m. Police say that shortly after that, another bus camera shows the Prius driving in the opposite direction away from the house. The Prius is then tracked as it makes the trip all the way back down to Miami, where Tato and Tuto are caught on video making one more stop.
On the day of the homicide, the two killers are seen driving through an ATM in that pine mica Prius.
You've got the phone towers. You've got the transponder, the SunPass. This road map was
We have arrested Sigfredo Garcia for the murder of Professor Daniel Markel.
One of the men accused of killing FSU law professor Dan Markel is now behind bars.
So what are two Miami criminals doing up here 400 miles away, allegedly murdering a law professor? It didn't seem to make sense, did it?
No, it didn't. So what is the connect? There's got to be a connection between Dan Markel and these two guys.
And then this sort of extraordinary disclosure happens where the prosecutors in Tallahassee do reveal this information. They say, we think that there's a link.
Turns out the police have their eye on someone brand new, a mystery woman who has close ties to a wealthy South Florida family and a suddenly growing bank account.
Would you characterize this as a murder for hire?
It was just simply a tale of a murder, and it was chilling.
The shocking murder of a beloved Florida State Law School professor.
Wendy Adelson had a problem, and her problem was named Dan Markel.
The acrimony and the fighting over the two boys was extreme.
My parents had more reason to dislike Danny than almost anyone else. He hurt their daughter.
She told me that Charlie had looked into having Danny killed. She meant it dead serious.
I am a periodontist.
I don't know if he did this. If you're looking at somebody, don't miss him.
I don't have evidence to charge the Adelsons, but there is a link to that family between our killers, and that link is Catherine Magbanua.
This mystery woman, Katie, she knows both parties in this very sordid soap opera.
The only thing she is guilty of is having horrible taste in men.
You can't get convicted for that, but will she for murder?
Law professors don't get shot in broad daylight. And so everybody's screaming for some sort of resolve right away.
This is a case where for 2.5 years we have only seen tidbits of the investigation, and now someone's being charged with it.
We have arrested Sigfredo Garcia for the murder of Professor Daniel Markel.
So in May 2016, Sigfredo Garcia, the first person arrested in connection with Dan Markel's murder.
We have a picture of Mr. Garcia.
Sigfredo Garcia, whose friends call him by the nickname Tuto, has some history with breaking the law. In fact, he's got 22 arrests going back to when he was a teenager.
There's a lot of speculation, a coincidence or two, but nothing that's going to put my client in Tallahassee.
Now remember, authorities say that when Sigfredo Garcia is driving up to Tallahassee, in that car with him is his old childhood buddy, Luis Rivera. Luis Rivera has also been charged with Dan Markel's murder. Now, Rivera was a drug dealer and the leader of the local Latin Kings gang.
At the moment of Sigfredo's arrest, Luis Rivera is already behind bars in a federal prison outside Orlando. He'd been picked up in a big federal raid against the Latin Kings a year before.
The arrests definitely set a new chapter. It switches from the death of the grief and the sorrow and the sadness, and now you can go towards, looking at some hope in the sense that, maybe there'll be some answers.
I mean, who are these people? What's their relationship to Danny?
I mean, the people who end up being arrested for this murder had never met Dan Markel before. They've got no motive.
Investigators are in a quandary. Here they have these two pretty low-level criminals from South Florida driving nearly 500 miles north to Tallahassee to murder this celebrated law professor they have never met and seem to have no connections with. There's only one conclusion they can draw. If Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera don't have any link to Dan Markel and didn't know him, they must have been hired by someone who did.
There's been a really active investigation, and the cops have been piecing everything together.
Now, if it is a murder for hire, police have to look into anyone who might have had trouble with Dan Markel. Don't forget, there was that bitter custody battle between Dan and Wendy over the custody of their two kids, leaving very bad blood between Dan and Wendy's very prominent, very wealthy family.
I mean, these children were so adored, and the fighting over them was so extreme that while it might sound not realistic to think that you would kill over custody, you can see that it would be a powerful enough motive.
I don't have evidence to charge the Adelsons. I can't go on TV and accuse them of murder without that evidence. But what I can say is there is a link to that family between our killers, and that link is Catherine Magbanua.
Katie is a Filipino immigrant. She did work in some clubs. She was a bottle girl. But she used her head, too. She worked in medical offices, and she was somewhat together.
This new character, Katie Magbanua, enters the fray, and sure enough, she knows both parties in this very sordid soap opera.
So she had children with Sigfredo Garcia, the accused hitman in this case.
And not only does Katie have 2 children by the accused hitman, but investigators discover that she knows, guess who? The Adelsons. She was actually receiving regular payments from their thriving cosmetic dentist.
This chain of murder.
But can they prove it? You know the expression, follow the money? That's exactly what investigators do here.
In the months after the murder, Katie starts getting a regular paycheck every 2 weeks from the Adelson Institute, signed by Donna. But for doing what? There was almost no paperwork for Katie, no work schedule, no application, no record of a job title among the files investigators subpoenaed from the Adelson Institute.
She was collecting checks from the dentistry. It was not necessarily clear what she was doing for her payment there, but they were able to tie some of these payments from the Adelsons to Katie.
And when investigators look at Katie's bank accounts, they say they discovered a curious spike in cash deposits. In the year leading up to Dan Markel's death, Katie's deposits totaled about $15,000. But in the year after his murder, Katie's deposits almost tripled to $41,000.
Katie's under surveillance. She doesn't know that her phone is being tapped, but it is, and police are listening to her calls.
Including one call that she makes to Sigfredo's attorney.
I gotta tell you, Katie, that it's on the internet and stuff, and there's already, stories about your involvement in the Tallahassee Democrat. Okay.
Okay, so my name is out there already?
Yes, yeah, your name is out there now. Okay.
That's already public record?
The only reason they would be approaching you now is to arrest you.
Okay.
So now there's this clear link between Katie and the Adelsons, and as investigators begin to gather more evidence, they come across this photograph of Katie Magbanua and Wendy Adelson looking like BFFs on the beach in Florida. So is it possible that Wendy knows more than she's telling?
This is Dan.
This is what we're missing.
So many friends everywhere, and amazing relationships.
2 years after the murder of Dan Markel, police have this huge breakthrough. They're finally able to draw this link between these 2 Miami area criminals they've arrested for killing him and the Adelsons, his ex-in-laws.
It's a woman named Catherine Magbanua.
Katie is the mother of 2 kids fathered by Sigfredo Garcia.
The Adelsons say Catherine also worked at that very successful dental clinic the Adelsons ran in Fort Lauderdale. But who in the Adelson family would actually be able to orchestrate a hit on Dan Markel?
Do you think someone would do this for your benefit without asking you?
The possible answer to that question came in an eye-opening comment made by Wendy about what...
The one, his name's Charlie, the one I'm really close to. He makes a lot of jokes in bad taste, and it was a joke he made. I looked into hiring a hitman, and it was cheaper to get you this TV, so instead I got you this TV. It was my divorce present.
Okay.
Such a horrible thing to say.
Would you think that this guy Charlie would even be capable of doing something like this?
No.
Let's just talk.
He's the Joker.
Okay.
But her former boyfriend, Jeff Lacaze, told police that when Wendy related the account to him, there was nothing funny about it.
She told me that Charlie had looked into having Danny killed in the summer of 2013. She meant it dead serious. I would be investigating Charlie Adelson. I don't know if he did this. But if you're looking at somebody, don't miss him.
It's enough to make police take a closer look at Big Brother Charlie. And when they do, they make a bombshell discovery.
Katie was dating Charlie from about 2013 to early 2015. That means at the time the murder was set up, they were hanging out.
It's a heck of a coincidence.
It is a heck of a coincidence.
If you're drawing a line between our victim and our killers, he's going to be one of the dots. I mean, he's a suspect.
Down in South Florida, Michael Weinstein, who is Charlie's attorney, told me it's ridiculous to think that his buddy, Charlie, would have had anything to do with Markel's murder.
He's a really easygoing, laid back, have a beer, relaxed kind of guy.
What I love about what I do is being able to restore people's smiles.
Did Charlie Adelson have anything to do with Markel's murder?
No. He's being looked at because of the fact that he had a dating relationship with Catherine. However, there's no evidence that he solicited any type of murder. If this was a Coen Brothers movie, that would be an unbelievable plot. But we don't live in a Coen Brothers movie.
But what the cops did next to rattle the Adelson's cage really did seem like something out of a Coen Brothers movie.
Yes, of course, she's going to be wearing green, black, and white top.
To see if they could get the goods on Charlie through his mom, Donna.
And they decided to do something called a bump, which is almost exactly what it sounds like. Let's see what we can shake loose.
What they did was they staked out Donna Adelson outside her condo in North Miami.
She's got sunglasses on, walking southbound on Alton on the west side, approaching the crosswalk.
Donna Adelson is approached on the street by a man she's never seen before. This person turns out to be an undercover FBI agent.
Excuse me, this is Adelson? How you doing? Just want to give you this.
Donna say that he was a brother of one of the assailants and that he needed something a little extra to take care of.
He helped your family with this problem you guys had up north, and we want to make sure that he's going through some rough times, and we want to make sure that you take care of what he's going through, the way you're taking care of Katie. And well, this will explain it.
And on that piece of paper is a picture of Dan, news clippings about the murder.
She has the paper, they're walking away. You see girl contact, she's crossing the street toward the school.
So that undercover agent also gives Donna a piece of paper with his phone number written on it, and she calls the guy.
Hello?
This is Mrs. Adelson. You handed me an article from the newspaper about my ex-son-in-law.
I'm listening.
I have to tell you, I mean, this is important. I have been so stressed out because I don't know your friend who is in jail. I've never met him.
Let's stop around, okay? You know who Katie is. And you know that Katie has somebody that knows Tato. And they took care of a problem for you people. You talk to the right people, you talk to people, you make this 5K come to me. That's all I need. Just do it and get it to me.
I'll call you
Bye.
back.
She calls her son Charlie, and they proceed to have these cryptic conversations.
I got some paperwork hand-delivered to me.
Does it involve me or other people?
Well, probably both of us. So you probably have a general idea what I'm talking about. So we'll just find some time to talk to each other.
Now, this conversation raises a lot of questions for people. Why wouldn't Donna just come out and tell Charlie right away about her conversation with this guy?
They must somehow become aware that they were being listened to, they were being eavesdropped. The string of calls went Donna to Charlie, Charlie to Katie.
I don't understand. It's either somebody's pulling your bones, somebody is just harassing you, or somebody's trying to get something out of you.
All I'm saying is find out who the is and tell them to stop playing their games.
Charlie seems to be begging Katie to figure out what's happening, right? Because he's getting worried.
I don't know who you have to talk to, but it needs to be nipped in the bud.
It's either the FBI thinking or whatever it is, because I'm getting pissed. Like, I'm gonna go to the cops right now.
Okay, well, either you go to the cops or we go to the cops, or
Exactly.
we'll find out.
We're both gonna go to the cops.
They discuss the possibility of going to law enforcement, and then it's dropped. There's never any discussion about it again.
Ultimately, this ambitious sting operation seems to fall flat. They do have these very suspicious conversations, but there's no confession on tape. There's no gotcha moment.
It's smoke, not fire, but it's a lot of smoke. Katie, and they would arrest Charlie.
And yet the evidence still didn't give prosecutors enough confidence to move forward with an arrest.
If prosecutors move forward with a case and they don't get a conviction, it's over. Prosecutors recognize that they get one bite at the apple, and they want to make sure it's the best bite.
You solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you are about to truth and nothing but the truth.
Yes, sir.
Then in late September of 2016, Georgia Kappelman and her team have a breakthrough. They come to an agreement with Luis Rivera.
We want to tell the truth and do what's right.
Now, if you've allegedly hired a guy to kill somebody and that accused killer starts singing to the cops, Dr. Allison, probably gonna have a really bad day. There seems to be this cloud of suspicion hanging over the Adelson family, but judging from the surveillance video of Wendy and her mother Donna, you'd never know it.
After the murder, Wendy did get to move to Miami. She took the 2 kids and she had a job at a law clinic. She essentially got everything she wanted.
The Adelsons are carrying on business as usual, and Luis Rivera, who has now been charged with the murder of Dan Markel, is contemplating his future, and until now, looks pretty bleak.
So Rivera, as mentioned, is in prison already on another charge, something involving drugs. He gets offered the sweetheart deal of all deals if he will describe his role in the murder of Dan Markel. He would face the death penalty if he was convicted of Dan's murder. A jury trial, and the possibility of the death penalty, or 7 extra years in prison. Rivera mulls these options and then decides, yeah, I'm going to cooperate.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you are about to give me is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Yes, sir.
In October 2016, Luis Rivera really broke open the case. He confesses, and he tells the whole story.
I thought we were going to come here and rob somebody.
Why did you think it was going to be a robbery?
I'm a jack boy. Okay. So I rob drug dealers. Okay.
So before you got in the car, you had a conversation with Sigfrido Garcia, Tudo, at your house. And he says he wants you to go with him to Tallahassee.
Yeah. That's when he told me, listen, I got to come up here for a job. I'm finna get hired. You're getting hired. I got to kill somebody. Come here to kill somebody.
Rivera tells investigators that 2 summers before, he and Sigfrido Garcia drove to Tallahassee, not once, but twice.
And what day was this, as best as you remember? He sent you a picture of Markel. And said y'all were going to go kill him.
He said he's going to pay me to go with him because he didn't want to go by himself. I asked him, who hired him? He like, Katie told me this lady's going to hire me, but I want you to go with me. I'll give you 35 grand.
Okay.
I said, all right, for the drive. I said, all right, I'll take the drive.
They finally stop at a motel near Tallahassee where they unwind. They drink, smoke weed, stay up late. At one point, Rivera sees an owl in the motel parking lot. He thinks it's a cool moment, so he snaps a picture of it and puts it on Instagram. Katie sees the post and calls Tuto right away.
Katie calls Tuto. Tell him to take that down. So she like, why would he do that? You can't tell nobody what is that. And my job be talking on the phone all day. You worry about me putting the picture on Instagram.
The Rivera and Garcia can't stop talking about the payoff they're going to get. They've already gotten $5,000 in traveling money from a mysterious person that Garcia would only refer to as a lady.
But he told me about the lady. He told me, yo, the lady got the money. She won't pay us.
And the two don't know all this.
Katie, I guess Katie told him everything. Because he stayed talking to Katie on the phone. Hey, babe, what's going on? Hey, the lady's gonna, you sure she's gonna have the money on time? Tell her don't play with it because we'll go show up in her house. Tell her she better have the money.
So he's saying Katie is the person between the woman that wants this done.
Katie's the one in the middle of everything. Put it like that.
Right.
And he implicated Sigfrido Garcia, Katie, and the Adelson family.
Because I asked him, why you want to kill this guy? Listen, the lady wants your 2 kids back. She wants full custody of the kids. That's what I want to go kill them.
Luis Rivera's statement was such strong evidence because for the first time you have someone admitting that they were involved with Dan Markel's murder, laying out all these things and corroborating all the evidence.
Have you ever killed anybody in the past?
In my life, so I meet people with bad shit with sticks like that. I wouldn't have enough balls to shoot somebody for some kids, man.
What about for $30,000?
I still wouldn't. I couldn't do it.
He outlined the whole deal.
And they came up to Tallahassee from Miami in a rented car.
I woke up around 7 times. Went by Markel's house. Seen a white man in the car. We followed his mother to school. He got the kid off. Boom. I lost him. I was here from Wednesday to Friday. But every time I went to the daycare, I lose him.
They bail on the hit. They around and head back to Miami until a month later.
Went to Markel's house. We followed him again. This time we followed him all the way to the gym. We waited in the parking lot for a while, for like 45 to an hour at the most. So when he came out of the gym, I followed him home. As I'm following home, he goes around the back. I go around 4 feet away from his car. Garcia jumps out. He goes around the car. When he's driving, I think Markel was on the phone that day. Shot him twice. Got in the car. We left. Kid's driving.
In Lewis's version, Sigfrido was the guy who went up to the side and fired the shots. It was just simply a tale of a murder, and it was chilling.
We dumped the gun, drove. After that, I made it home. Never seen about this again. Never told nobody.
Now, the first person that Garcia calls after they allegedly carry out this hit, it's Katie Magbanua.
He called until everybody's done.
You hear her on the other
Yeah, I
end?
can hear you.
But it's Katie's voice.
Yes, Katie's voice, 100% Katie's voice.
With that, the cops had enough evidence to arrest Katie.
This morning, Catherine Magbanua is facing a first-degree murder charge for the slaying of Professor Dan Markel in 2014.
Police in Florida arresting a single mom, accusing her of arranging the killing of a prominent Florida state law professor.
Prosecutors believe she served as a go-between with the alleged hitmen who were allegedly being paid $100,000.
Katie Magbanua is going to get her day in court. All eyes in that courtroom are going to be on a critical prosecution witness.
It's a high-profile case that's garnering attention across the world, trying to seek justice for FSU law professor Dan Markel.
Outside, it's pretty typical Tallahassee weather. About 100 degrees, incredibly humid, painfully hot. But inside the courtroom, it's freezing.
The courtroom is beyond frigid. I saw people bringing in blankets and jackets to keep themselves warm because it's so cold in there.
Dan Markel's parents have waited 5 long years for justice.
Ready to be seated, please?
And they're sitting just a few feet away in that ice-cold courtroom from Katie Magbanua and Sigfrido Garcia, the co-defendants, on trial for the murder of their son.
We'll start with the state of Florida.
Dan Markel, father of 2 young boys and highly respected attorney at law and professor, was shot twice in the head in his own garage in broad daylight. Who would do such a thing?
2 people are on trial for the murder of Dan Markel, but there is a giant elephant in that cold courtroom, and the prosecution pulls no punches in the opening statement. They're promising to tell the jury that, hey, we're going to lay this whole thing out for you. Not only are you going to learn that these 2 sought and were hired to kill Dan Markel, we're going to tell you why.
And the solution to that problem was Magbanua, Rivera, and Garcia. I believe that you will be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Catherine Magbanua was hired to solicit Garcia to come to Tallahassee and to execute Mr. Markel in cold blood.
Keep in mind, Katie's now been sitting in jail for 3 years.
She was offered a deal that could let her walk out.
You'd think that if she had anything to spill or dish about who might have hired her, she would have done it by now, to save her own skin, to be with her kids. But she hasn't done that.
They're so desperate to get Charles Abelson, they want to arrest her, because that's our way to get to Charlie. So now, 3 years later, she is sitting here, accused of a crime that she did not commit. And at the end of this case, you are going to see that the only thing she is guilty of is having horrible taste in men.
The first few witnesses are called to effectively set the scene. A neighbor who hears something. The first officer to arrive. The person who was on the phone with Dan Markel when he was shot.
He said, "Can you please hold on a second? There's an unfamiliar person in my driveway."
But then, day 2, it's a Friday afternoon, and jaws just start dropping in that courtroom. The prosecution calls a very reluctant witness.
When Wendy Adelson walked into the courtroom to take the stand, I immediately sent out an email to everyone in the newsroom, like, okay, Dan Markel's ex-wife is about to testify. How does she feel about the fact that the state is saying her family is in involved in this murder.
Does your family have a dental practice in South Florida?
They do.
Is your family in South Florida wealthy?
Are you asking me to speculate?
No, I'm asking if they're wealthy. You may, if you don't know, you say you don't know.
It depends how you define wealthy.
Is it fair to say that your brother is very protective of you?
I think that's fair to say.
Now, Wendy starts to get grilled about her older brother, Charlie. In fact, there are so many questions about Charlie Adelson that it almost seems like he's the one on trial.
Did he ever joke about he looked into hiring a hitman, but buying you a TV as a divorce present would be cheaper?
He did make that joke.
And then the prosecution breaks out that photograph that reveals a curious link between Wendy Adelson and Katie Magbanua.
Do you know Catherine Magbanua?
I have met her before.
I'm going to show you what I've marked as State's Exhibit 36. Is that a photograph of you and Catherine Magbanua at the beach?
With her friend, yeah.
And did you say how you know Miss Magbanua?
She was dating my brother.
This picture becomes an important moment. She just established for the jury the first prosecutors do next. They call Wendy's ex-boyfriend, Jeff Lacasse, and when he takes the stand, he testifies that Wendy was desperate to leave Tallahassee, and that her brother Charlie used to talk about taking care of the, quote, problem.
She said that Charlie had explored all options to take care of the problem, and that he had looked into having Professor Markel killed. My stomach kind of flipped. It was like a chilling statement.
It's now day 3 of the trial, and prosecutors call their star witness.
Luis Rivera is on the stand. He's testified that he was there when Markel was shot.
He's the guy who confessed to police that he drove to Tallahassee with Sigfredo Garcia for that hit on Dan Markel, and he's agreed to testify for the prosecution.
Did he have any information about who it was you were coming to Tallahassee to kill?
Yes, ma'am. Dan Markel.
Who was supposed to be the shooter on this first trip?
I was going to be the shooter.
And did y'all return to Tallahassee on July 16th, 2014?
Yes, ma'am.
And what happened once you pulled into his driveway?
As soon as we pulled in, Garcia jumped off. Went to the driver's side and shot him.
He shot Mr. Markel?
Yes, ma'am.
How many times?
Twice.
Do you see the person in the courtroom who shot Mr. Markel?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you please point that person out?
Garcia. Yeah.
What color is the shirt?
Blue.
And did you get the money the next day?
Yes, ma'am.
Who gave you the money?
Garcia.
Alright, and tell us about the money. How was it packaged?
Hundreds. They were stapled.
Stapled?
$1,000 staple each one of them.
Alright, so Garcia hired you to do a murder, didn't he?
Yes, ma'am.
And who hired him?
The family.
Do you see the person in the courtroom that you say hired Sigfredo Garcia to do this homicide?
I only want to see his cage.
The witness has identified defendant Magbanua. No further questions.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense calls Catherine Magbanua to the stand.
Katie Magbanua broke her silence.
For more than 4 hours Wednesday, Catherine Magbanua took the stand in her own defense. She's facing life in prison.
Now, inside the Leon County Courthouse, Luis Rivera has just told jurors how his childhood buddy, Sigfredo Garcia, gunned down Dan Markel.
As soon as we pulled in, Garcia jumped off, went behind his car into the driver's side and shot him.
But remember, the prosecution's star witness isn't exactly a saint. Garcia's attorney confronted Rivera about his ties to the notorious Latin Kings gang. It's an effort to show that Rivera, the linchpin of this entire case, is a liar.
Mr. Rivera, the tribe of the Latin Kings.
I was a leader. Are we for the murder case or for the Latin King case?
I think it's the same thing.
No, it's not. You keep talking about the Latin Kings, but it ain't got nothing to do with the murder.
Hold on, but you're King Tato, right?
Yeah, but it don't got nothing to do with the murder.
You have both defense teams who are saying he's not credible. He has been lying from day one, but there are moments that come up, and what Luis Rivera says does seem credible.
For instance, there was Rivera's account of how he received that cash payoff after the hit on Markel.
It was stapled.
Stapled?
$1,000 staple each one of them.
And here's why that's important. When Charlie Adelson's ex-girlfriend, June Chinda, takes the stand, she says that's the same way that Charlie kept his cash.
In fact, you said that the money was stapled into stacks of $100 bills. didn't you?
They were hundreds, yes. And I don't know if they were stacks, but there was a staple on it.
What a coincidence. Who staples $100 bills?
When it's Catherine McBenoit's attorney's chance to call up witnesses, they call up one person, and that's their client.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense calls Catherine McBenoit to the stand.
The risk of putting a client on the witness stand in a murder trial is that inconsistencies or answers that don't seem credible can be absolutely devastating to the defense.
Now, how are you feeling?
Nervous?
Did you have anything to do with the murder of Dan Markel?
No, ma'am.
Did you get the father of your children, Mr. Garcia, to commit a murder on behalf of Mr. Charlie Adelson?
No, ma'am.
McBenoit tells the jury that is an innocent explanation for that suspicious-looking spike in the cash deposits she made after Markel's murder.
She said, I was a bottle girl at a nightclub in Miami.
What was a good night for you at the club?
I can walk out of there with $1,000 to $1,500.
Another question that popped up over and over again. You're getting paychecks from the Adelson Institute, but we don't have any records that you worked there. And she admitted that she was getting paid by the Adelson Institute, but her job was more so Charlie's assistant.
Was it just odd jobs that you did for Charlie Adelson?
Yes, ma'am.
But you had a steady paycheck?
Yes, ma'am.
During cross-examination, prosecutor Georgia Kappelman grills McBenoit about exactly what kinds of tasks she performed for Charlie.
Why did he put you on the payroll? Is that as a favor?
Yes, ma'am.
Not as payment for a murder?
No, ma'am.
Not to keep you happy?
Why wouldn't he just pay me the cash? Why would I have to get a check from somewhere?
I'm going to ask the questions, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
The money that you came into immediately after this homicide.
From your diagram, I could see that, but I don't recall that.
But you gotta listen to McBenoit's response when her own attorney asks her who she thinks did play a role in the hit on Markel.
Do you have information that Charlie Adelson was involved in this?
Do I have information? I mean, based on everything that we've been seeing, but I don't have personal information.
Based on everything you've seen, do you think Charlie was involved in this?
Yes.
The fact that Catherine McBenoit took the stand and under oath she said Charlie Adelson could have something to do with this was a huge moment.
Those responsible must be brought to justice. The Adelsons. Someday, there will likely be a jury in this courthouse determining the fate of one or all of the Adelsons. But you're not that jury.
It's the state's theory that there are other people than the two folks that are on trial here today that you all are concerned about. And these people also bear responsibility for the murder of Professor Markel. Anyone else is for another day or for another jury.
The main question that's looming for the jury now, will they find both defendants guilty beyond reasonable doubt that they were involved with Dan Markel's murder?
5 years after Dan Markel was brutally murdered, there's finally an outcome in this case.
State of Florida versus Sigfredo Garcia. We, the jury, find as follows. As count one, the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder.
The jury, after hours of deliberating, even sleeping on it overnight, they came back and decided that Sigfredo Garcia was guilty of first-degree murder and guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Dan Markel's dad put his head down into his hands and he took that deep sigh, that deep breath.
So, as to Ms. McBenoit, I will declare this case mistried.
The jury came back. They couldn't come up with a decision for Catherine McBenoit. It ended up being a mistrial. Catherine McBenoit will stay in jail until they decide what happens with her if she goes to trial.
I'm certainly happy with the outcome for Mr. Garcia and hope we can have a similar one for Ms. McBenoit, whether it be today or in the future.
How close are you to putting together a case against the Adelsons? I mean, again, they figured...
You know that as well as I do. I just laid out the whole case, so everyone here is as aware as I am as to what the evidence is. I'm really happy to get the beginnings of some justice for the Markel family.
Despite the mixed outcomes, the question remains, how was Charlie Adelson not charged? Prosecutors point the finger at him,
While it remains to be seen whether the Adelsons will ever have to answer to law enforcement, we caught up with Charlie Adelson in 2016 to ask him about his alleged role in his former brother-in-law's murder.
Dr. Adelson, were you involved in a plot to kill your brother-in-law, Dan Markel? Before the shooting, did you ever discuss hiring a hitman?
Hours ago, Charlie Adelson's attorney sent out a statement saying, in part, the prosecution couldn't prove its theory on Katie after 3 years of really thorough investigation and preparation. This is why they've not charged Charlie and his family. The case simply isn't there. After the hung jury, their prospects have gone down, not up.
Now, attorneys for the entire Adelson family have strongly denied any involvement, and just yesterday we received a new statement from Wendy's lawyer saying the presentations by the prosecution and the defense, as well as Wendy's own testimony, have demonstrated beyond any doubt that she had no involvement in this terrible tragedy.
The central irony or tragedy of the case that what Dan was struggling to prevent while he was still alive, which is his kids moving back down to Miami, and this is precisely what has happened.
In her podcast, Wendy talks about how happy they have been with the Adelson family.
My children are thriving and happy. We live with my parents, incredibly devoted to our well-being.
I think that what is so sad for the Markels, besides this horrible, violent death of their son, they don't have any connection to his children. The Adelson family, they don't share the children with them. There's no relationship there.
This is Danny, and they're like twins, absolutely twins. The blonde, curly hair, the smile, the nose.
Danny took so much pride in the kids.
Their names were changed from Markel to Adelson. I don't know if they really know who we are, if there's such a thing. Danny is spinning in his grave.
Danny loved them to infinity.
Our second speaker is Dan Markel, speaking about retributive justice.
I do know one thing for certain. Dan Markel, the legal scholar, would have had a lot to say about how justice is played out in the case of his own murder.
Many of us who were in Dan's life still wake up and think about what life would be like if Dan were still here, and the thought doesn't only go to who killed him and why. It really, the sadness is still there.
We just hope that justice will eventually be done. That was Danny's big thing, is justice.